Welcome into the Hoosier Illustrated post-game wrap-up show presented by HoosierIllustrated.com. I'm Drew Rosenberg, joined by Kyler Staley. Indiana suffered really a brutal 79-70 loss. It's hard to say brutal about a single-digit loss on the road in the Big Ten, but that was gut-wrenching the way it went down.
Yeah, it was a weird game. I felt like it was a game of like mini runs, and it just kind of felt like whoever had that last run was going to win the game. And for the most part, I think Northwestern had that last run. I think they got the lead up to 14, and then you give Indiana credit because they didn't roll over. I feel like with all the other losses, once you hit that 10 or 12 point gap, Indiana just folds, and Indiana didn't. I mean, they got it within 4. I think Mackenzie Mbako hit a few big shots, but the main thing with this game is that Indiana just didn't guard the 3-point line very, very well. And Ty Berry, who's known as just being a shooter, that's what he does. It's if he makes a few shots, he's going to stay hot. If he misses a few shots, he's going to stay cold, type of thing. And this is one of those games where he was hot, and 23 points, 7 of 10 from 3. I mean, it's just annoying on the fact because obviously the assignment, the game plan for him is to obviously stick on him. And Indiana, I think Mbako was the guy that was mainly guarding him at times, which I think is just a terrible matchup.
Yeah.
And all the other guys that like took their turns guarding Barry as well, just fell asleep, and that's just what you don't do. So it's just a frustrating loss because you could tell that Indiana really, really needed this game. And I will say, like, Indiana didn't play too bad. Like, there was a lot of bright spots in that game. Another big game from Umar Ballo. Mackenzie Mbako finally has, a big outing. He's been really quiet the last few games. So it's a tough loss, not a blowout loss, but just a really tough one that, if you're Indiana, you kind of want it back, but unfortunately you're not going to get it back.
Yeah, I mean, it was good to see Renew back on the court. Wasn't his best performance, wasn't even close to his best performance. But that was always, it's good to have him back. Carter, I see your question talking about Bryson Tucker's return. Really hard to predict, just because with college, its status is tough. I think Sunday.
Dislocated finger. Obviously, that takes a little bit to, get back. And I don't know if it's on his shooting hand or not. But, I mean, dislocated finger, they weren't going to force him in. But you didn't mention Malik Renew's back. So I think for the most part, Mike Woodson did an okay job of getting Malik in. There was a time in the second half where I thought he played just a little bit too much, but it is good, moving forward that Indiana looks like they're going to be back to full strength for the most part.
Yeah, it's still though, this is one of those games you're going to look at maybe in March if Indiana is on the outside looking in on the wrong side of the bubble, and you're going to think they were able to hold on and win this game, this season could have been very different. I think there's no easy games in the Big Ten, especially not on the road, but you have to make the most of your chances. And tonight felt like a golden opportunity for Indiana to get a big win, and they kind of crumbled. Ty Berry, I mean, we talked about him. Indiana just had no answer for him on the perimeter. I was a little disappointed. I would have liked to see Cannon Carlisle play a little more. Maybe think he could have been a better matchup on Berry. Just probably the best perimeter guard defensively Indiana has. And I kind of want to kind of reminds me of like a Rob Finney type of player. I think honestly, Carlisle might be better offensively than Finney. He might not have shown it so far this season, but Finney kind of earned that trust with Woodson where he was able to play even with himself being kind of a liability offensively. And it doesn't feel like Carlisle has that same kind of, leash that Finney had here.
Yeah, obviously pretty quiet from Carlisle tonight, but I do like the idea of putting him on Ty Berry. He could have been much better than all the other guys that they threw on Ty Berry because honestly, Ty Berry got anything that he wanted tonight. It was definitely his game, but I mean, here's the big picture thing. It's just all about consistency with this team, right? Indiana is probably the most Jekyll and Hyde team in the Big Ten. Mm-hmm. I think that's a pretty fair assessment of what we've seen so far this season. One game, they're playing with toughness and they're playing hard, and you can tell that they want to win the game. And the next game, they just kind of, relax a little bit. And that's what Indiana did just a little bit too much tonight. They were just a little bit too relaxed at times. And, like I said, I don't think they played terrible. I mean, that's definitely, when you look at all the losses, this was easily the best that they've looked in the losses that they've had. But it's just consistency at the end of the day. They ended that first half with a really good run. I think it was like 18-2. Held I think it was the last 9 minutes or so without Northwestern without a field goal. So I knew at that point when Indiana was only up 6 and Northwestern had been struggling to score the ball. You wanted Indiana to just be up by double digits or something to, bridge, widen that gap just a little bit more. And they just couldn't do that. The offense just wasn't clicking when they needed to click. And like I said, it was just a game of mini runs. So fortunately, Northwestern had the last run there, was just too much to steal. Brooke Barnsheiser made some big plays down the stretch. An Indiana guy that's always going to play his best when he plays against a team like Indiana or Purdue. So it's a tough loss, man. It's really tough. I feel like if Indiana were to play Northwestern again, I do think Indiana could get that back. But fortunately, you don't see Northwestern again at least in the regular season if you're Indiana. So you got to move forward, and it makes Sunday's matchup against Maryland at home a must-win game. Just a tough one. It's a tough loss. Northwestern needed this win. They're still fighting for their NCAA tournament lives. I tweeted before the game that they're probably the team that's starving the most for a win. And that's what they showed tonight. They made the plays when they needed to down the stretch, and Indiana just didn't do that.
Yeah, and they're a lot better than the record shows. That's one thing I do want to, say. Like Northwestern, Brooks Barnheiser, Nick Barnelli, those are two really good players who've both taken enormous leaps in college. Ty Berry, coming off his injury. If you watched the game on TV, you heard all about it. All game, it felt like Robbie Hummel was talking about Ty Berry coming off the injury and him finding his groove. Indiana had no answer for him. And it's kind of, I texted you this, Kyler. Indiana's not had a player like Ty Berry, a guard under Mike Woodson, that you really can't go under on screens. Ty Berry's a guy you can't go under if he's hitting shots. Indiana has not had that. And it's just that missing part of the offense, because teams can just go under and help on the perimeter or the entry pass to the post, because there's no real threat of someone to make a three off the dribble.
When it comes to, Indiana, when it comes to them fighting through screens, they're one of the worst teams I've seen all season long. And that's what gets those shooters so open, is because they don't know how to get around screens. And I just think that's the defensive philosophy that Mike Woodson has, taught in a way, because it's just a common theme. It's every single guard, it's every single wing that Indiana's had. They just can't get around the screens. And that's what opens up so much shooters. If Indiana could find guys or just maybe teach a different way on the defensive end to get around the screens, I think they'd be much better guarding the three. And like you saw tonight, it was just Northwestern shot 48% from three. You could have cut that easily in half if you just had some capable guys to get around screens. Plus, also sticking with the assignment, Anthony Leal, Mackenzie Mbako, those are the two guys that I can think of that regarding Ty Berry. Just sticking with him and don't fall asleep. That's your one and only job, is to stick with the shooter, and you're not doing that. And that's the frustrating part, especially Anthony Leal. He's not the fastest guy in the world. He's not the most athletic guy in the world, even though he did have that kind of surprising baseline dunk that was called off. But, he's smart. He's a senior and everything. So he just got to be better than that. And just Mbako, we know his defensive struggles. We knew he was going to be bad on that. I do wish that Indiana would have went with like Miles Rice or Cannon Carlisle when it comes to guarding him. And they just didn't do that. And it's just bad assignment. It's just bad following the game plan. And Indiana really paid for that.
Yeah, and you mentioned it. Indiana now Sunday kind of turns into must win. We have a question kind of talking about Maryland's personnel. I think you have to start with Derek Queen. Indiana fans, especially those who really follow the recruiting, you have to start with him. He was, one of the big targets Indiana had and missed out on this offseason. And I mean, as a freshman, he's been unbelievable. 15-8 for them. For Maryland, you had Jacoby Gillespie. This Maryland team, it's another team that you look at their record, 14-5. They're another team that's a lot better than I think people kind of talk about in the Big Ten. This is a team that I talked about as like a potential sleeper in the Big Ten, and they've proven they can knock off the best of the best, but they can also lose to anybody.
Yeah, I don't think they've won a single game on the road this year, if I can remember correctly. Yeah. So I guess that's an advantage for Indiana, but at the same time, you saw Illinois come in and drop, 100 points basically on them. So anybody can beat anybody on any given night, home court advantage, even though it is an advantage, for Indiana for the most part. It won't be this game, but it all starts with Derek Queen. Obviously, that's going to be the fun matchup, the one they kind of key in on, because he was, down to Indiana and Maryland. It seemed like, with his recruitment, and obviously things went a little differently for Indiana, and he decided to stay home and, stick with Maryland. So, but he's been great. He's been a lot better than what I thought he was going to be as a freshman. Completely dominated, and he's easily maybe freshman of the year when it comes to Big Ten. I think that's a pretty strong argument there, but he's obviously going to be the guy. It's going to be a really fun matchup with him and Ballo, and I'll be curious to see what Indiana does. I still don't think that Malik Renew is going to start. He's probably not going to be fully healthy again. And honestly, I don't see Malik Renew starting for the rest of the season unless another injury happens. I think Indiana's kind of found something with the starting lineup that they have. And I think they'll just stick with that. But once Malik gets healthy, back to full strength and stuff, having him coming off the bench for Ballo or whatever they're going to do with that is just going to be big for Indiana. But, it starts with Derek Queen. And then obviously, if you can shut him down, which it'll be really hard to, you got a really good chance, to beat Maryland. But it's not going to be an easy game by any stretch of the means. It's definitely going to be one that Indiana needs to have in order to kind of stay, afloat when it comes to their NCAA tournament hopes. And if they were to lose this game, it's going to be really, really difficult for Indiana to climb out of that hole.
Yeah, and Maryland is not a team, like, they're not known as a three-point shooting team. They're kind of middle in the pack in both attempts and makes. But you would have said the same thing about Northwestern, and we saw what happened tonight. Indiana has to do a better job defending shooters, because a guy like Jacoby Gillespie could really torch them if they don't go out and guard him like they did Ty Berry. And it was, going back to that, it was felt like not just guys really didn't do a good job closing out. It was kind of lazy late closeouts and just really trouble defending screens. And you can't let a guy like Ty Berry kill you. I think Alec lastly sent it to us. It was coming into the night, Northwestern was 6-2 in games. He scores double figures, and it was like 5-5 in games he doesn't. That's a key, and it was probably the deciding factor tonight.
Yeah, and if you're Indiana, it just goes back down to the game plan aspect of it. If you don't follow the game plan, if you don't recognize those things, it's going to be a long night for you. And obviously that was what happened with Indiana. They had chances to close this game out, and Indiana had, opportunities to extend the lead, to get better. And when their shots weren't falling, I thought their defense was a little bit better. But like I said, at the beginning of this, it was a game of many runs. Northwestern had their last run. If Indiana has the same approach when it comes to, guarding the shooters for Maryland, even though they're not a great three-point shooting team, if they have that same approach and they're not sticking with the guys that they need to stick with, when it comes to Maryland, it could be the same result. It doesn't matter if it's at home. It doesn't matter if it's on the road. It's just, you got to follow the game plan at the end of the day. And I just don't think Indiana's players really do that on a consistent basis. I mean, or I know that they don't do that, because obviously inconsistency has just been the main point of this Indiana team. So follow the game plan on Sunday. You got to win that game, just to stay afloat, because the next 7 games, still quad one opportunities. If you're to win, you get right back on the right side of the bubble, and you get back into the race when it comes to the Big Ten. But, I mean, you lose a game at home against Maryland, a team that hasn't won on the road. It's just going to be really, really difficult to even, get back to that level that you want to get back at.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of talked about it at the start of this stretch. It was, a brutal stretch, but plenty of opportunities for Indiana to get that, signature win. And like that signature opportunity, and that kind of they haven't really taken advantage of it yet. And that's something, you're running out of chances. And it's towards the end of January right now. Soon it's going to be February, and before we know it, it's going to be March. And it feels like kind of last year's team when you're talking about they need to, start picking up some big wins. Last year's team went on that 5-game winning streak to close the season, but it was too late at that point to where they needed to, win multiple Big Ten games in the tournament. And if Indiana wants to avoid, repeating that, they need to pick up some big wins, and they need to do it now.
Yeah, next 7 games, so important for Indiana, and a lot of them are on the road. So you better figure out something. You got to find within yourself, I guess, in a way, to get some wins here. Because, I mean, if you don't get wins in this next 7-game stretch, you're looking at a situation like Indiana's all too familiar with going into the Big Ten tournament. You got to win a few games to get, on that good side of the bubble. And unfortunately, right now, the way things are trending, I feel like that's where Indiana's heading right now. But these next 7 games, you got to take advantage of it in some sort or fashion, and just hopefully you can get wins and kind of change the trajectory of this season.
Yeah. And that's a wrap for the HoosierIllustrated.com post-game wrap-up. We'll have all the coverage of tonight's game, stats, a live blog if you missed any of the game on the HoosierIllustrated.com website, as well as coverage of all Indiana basketball, football, everything you could want for the coverage-wise. We have on HoosierIllustrated.com, including live coverage from Sunday's game at Assembly Hall. For all things HoosierIllustrated.com, Drew Rosenberg, this is Kyle Staley. Thanks for watching.